There are moments in your life that feel ordinary on the surface, days that pass like any other, hours that seem quiet, uneventful, almost forgettable. But what if I told you that one of those moments, one specific day, was anything but ordinary? What if I told you that while you were simply breathing, thinking, scrolling, working, or even resting, something massive was happening around you? July 14th. You remember that day, don't you? Or maybe you don't, and that's exactly what makes this so powerful. Because the truth is, not every miracle announces itself with noise. Not every breakthrough comes with fireworks. Some of the most powerful shifts in your life happen in silence, behind your back, beyond your sight, outside the reach of your physical senses. And that is exactly what happened to you. While you were going about your day, something in the atmosphere around you began to tremble. Not physically, but spiritually. A tension that had been building for weeks, maybe months, suddenly reached its breaking point. And you felt something, didn't you? A strange calm, or maybe an unexplainable heaviness that suddenly lifted. A moment where your mind went quiet for no reason. A feeling that something changed, but you couldn't explain what. That wasn't your imagination. That was the shift. Because in that exact moment, the one you almost overlooked, heaven moved. And when heaven moves, everything else must respond. Archangel Michael was there. Not as a symbol, not as a story, but as a witness. A warrior standing at the edge of a battle you didn't even know you were in. His presence was not passive. It was active, commanding, unstoppable. And what he witnessed in that moment was something rarely seen. But before we go there, you need to understand something about yourself. You have been under pressure lately, haven't you? Things felt heavier than usual. Small problems felt bigger. Your energy felt drained even when you tried to rest. You may have questioned yourself more, felt misunderstood, disconnected, maybe even watched, not physically, but spiritually, like something was resisting your every step forward. It wasn't random. It was build-up. Because whenever something great is about to shift in your life, there is always resistance before release. And July 14th was your release point. But here's the part that will truly shake you. You didn't fight that battle alone. In fact, you didn't fight it at all. Because what happened on that day was not about your effort. It was about divine intervention. It was about heaven stepping in at the exact moment when things could have gone in a completely different direction. Something was targeting your peace. Something was pressing against your progress. Something was trying to remain attached to your life, and then suddenly, without warning, it lost its grip. Not slowly, not gradually, all at once. That's why it felt so strange. That's why something inside you paused, even if just for a second. Because your spirit recognized what your mind could not yet understand. Something fell. Something broke. Something ended. And you were standing right in the middle of it without even realizing what had just taken place. But Archangel Michael saw it. You witnessed every second, every force, every collapse. And what he saw will change the way you understand your life from this moment forward. Because July 14th was not just a day. It was a dividing line. A moment where what was against you suddenly lost its power. And what is for you began to rise. You are not where you were before that day. Even if everything looks the same, everything has changed. And now you are about to understand why. Type "I feel the shift" in the comments if this message is already speaking to your spirit. Blessing code 1717 is now activated around you. What you must understand now is that what happened on July 14th did not begin on that day. It did not suddenly appear out of nowhere, and it certainly was not random. what you felt before that moment, the pressure, the confusion, the emotional weight that seemed to follow you without explanation, that was not your imagination. It was the evidence of something unfolding behind you, something moving in the unseen, something positioning itself long before you became aware of it. Because while you were living your life, there was a battle happening. Not in front of you, where you could react. Not in a way that would alarm you instantly. No, this was a silent battle, a strategic one, a hidden confrontation that took place in the spiritual realm, just beyond the reach of your natural senses. And the reason it was silent is because it was never meant for you to panic. It was meant for you to be protected. You may have noticed how certain things started to feel off. Conversations didn't feel the same. People's energies seemed different. Situations that once flowed easily began to resist you. There were moments where you felt like something was working against you, but you couldn't prove it, couldn't explain it, couldn't even fully understand it. That was not coincidence. That was pressure from forces you could not see but your spirit could feel. Because there were things trying to remain attached to your life. Old cycles that did not want to release you. Patterns that had followed you for far too long. Energies that had grown comfortable in your space, feeding off your uncertainty, your hesitation, your past. And when the time came for you to move forward, those forces did not want to let go. So they resisted. Quietly. Subtly. Strategically. They didn't attack loudly, because loud attacks can be recognized and resisted. Instead, they worked in silence, creating confusion, planting doubt, draining your energy little by little, making you question yourself, making you second-guess your decisions, making you feel like you were stuck in a place you could not escape. And the most dangerous part of all is that it almost felt normal. That is how silent battles operate. They blend into your reality so deeply that you begin to accept them as part of your life. You start to believe that the heaviness is just how things are, that the delays are just bad timing, that the emotional exhaustion is just life being difficult. But it wasn't. It was resistance. Because something about you was changing. Your awareness was shifting. Your energy was rising. Your spirit was beginning to detach from what no longer belonged to you. And when that begins to happen, anything that has been feeding off your old version will begin to fight to stay connected. That is why things intensified before July 14th. That is why you felt stretched. That is why you felt like something was building, even if you couldn't explain what. Because behind you the battle was escalating. Forces were aligning, not randomly, but specifically around you. Around your path. Around your progress. Around your next step. And they were not just observing, they were attempting to hold their ground. But here is what they did not expect. They did not expect intervention. They did not expect heaven to step in at the exact moment when their grip seemed strongest. They did not expect that while they were working in silence, something greater was watching in authority. Archangel Michael was not distant from this moment. He was present, watching the buildup, watching the resistance, watching every force that thought it could remain attached to your life. And when you were feeling the pressure, he was preparing for the release. Because the silent battle was never meant to defeat you. It was meant to reach a breaking point. A moment where everything that had been holding on would be forced to let go all at once. That is why the shift felt sudden. That is why it did not feel gradual. Because the battle had already been fought behind you. And by the time you felt the change, the outcome had already been decided. You were never as alone as it felt. You were never as stuck as it seemed. You were standing in the middle of a battle you could not see, but one that was already turning in your favor. And July 14th was the moment it finally broke. Type "I am protected" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 2020 is now surrounding you. There are moments in time that are so precise, so exact, that if you blink, you miss them completely. Not because they are small, but because they happen beyond the limits of what your eyes can capture. And what took place on July 14th was one of those moments. The divine interruption that did not ask for your attention, but demanded a response from everything around you. Because there was a second, a single, sacred second, where everything changed. Not gradually, not over hours, not over days. Instantly. While you were in the middle of something ordinary, maybe you were sitting quietly, maybe you were thinking about your next move, maybe you were distracted, maybe you were tired, there was a sudden shift in the atmosphere surrounding you. It did not announce itself loudly, but your spirit registered it. Something paused. Something loosened. Something that had been pressing against you stopped. But with the exact second, the moment when what had been building in silence reached its breaking point. Because behind what you could see, there was a collision happening. Light and darkness were no longer coexisting in tension. They were confronting each other directly. And when that confrontation reached its peak, heaven moved with authority. Archangel Michael stepped forward, not cautiously, not solely, but with precision, the kind of precision that only comes when the outcome is already known. He did not hesitate because this moment had already been prepared. Every force that had gathered around your life, every resistance that had been quietly holding on, every unseen weight that had been pressing against your path was suddenly exposed in that second. And exposure always leads to collapse. Because darkness cannot maintain its position when light arrives with authority. That is what made this moment different. This was not a gradual release. This was not something that unfolded over time. This was a sudden unraveling, a breaking point where everything that had been holding on to you lost its grip at once. That is why it felt so strange to you. Because your mind could not fully process what your spirit had already recognized. You may have felt a brief stillness, as if time slowed down for just a moment. You may have noticed your thoughts quieting unexpectedly. You may have felt a subtle sense of relief, even if you could not explain where it came from. That was not coincidence. That was confirmation. Because in that exact second the atmosphere around you changed. What had been heavy became lighter. What had been blocked became open. What had been resisting you was no longer able to stand. And the most powerful part of all is this: it did not require your effort. You did not have to fight in that moment. You did not have to say anything. You did not even have to be aware of what was happening. Because this shift was not dependent on your strength. It was activated by divine timing. That is why Archangel Michael witnessed it so clearly. Because from his position, there was no confusion. There was no delay. There was no uncertainty. He saw exactly what fell, exactly what broke, exactly what ended in that moment. And what he saw was not small. It was overwhelming. Because when the shift happened, it was not just one thing that collapsed. It was everything that had been holding on, all at once. That is why the energy around you could not remain the same after that moment. Even if your environment looked identical, even if the people around you did not change immediately, even if your circumstances appeared unchanged, the foundation beneath it all had already shifted. And once the foundation shifts, everything else must eventually follow. This is why you may feel different now, even if you cannot fully explain why. This is why certain things no longer affect you the same way. This is why your reactions are changing. Your awareness is sharpening. Your sense of clarity is beginning to return. Because you are no longer standing in the same atmosphere you were in before July 14th. That version of your reality ended in that second, and what replaced it is still unfolding. But here is what you must understand moving forward. That moment was not random. It was appointed. It was the exact second when everything that had been working against you lost its authority to remain. And even though you did not see it happen, you are living in the result of it now. Type "IT happened for me" in the comments if you feel this truth. Blessing code 3030 is now activated around your life. As this revelation settles into your spirit, understand this: what shifted for you on July 14th was not just for your life alone. It is part of a greater movement, a divine ripple meant to reach others who are still standing where you once stood. The word says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days," and right now, you are being invited into that sacred act of sowing. I feel it strongly. This is your moment to respond, not out of obligation, but out of alignment. When you release through Super Thanks or through the PayPal link in the description or QR code on your screen, you are not giving to a platform. You are igniting light in someone else's darkness. Every seed becomes a voice. Every offering becomes a message. Every act of obedience becomes a doorway for another soul to awaken. Do not delay this prompting, because obedience in moments like this carries multiplication. As you give, heaven sees, heaven records, and heaven responds. Step into this now, and watch how God moves through your seed. There are moments in the spiritual realm that cannot be measured by human language. Moments so intense, so overwhelming, that even if you tried to describe them, words would fall short. And what Archangel Michael witnessed in that exact second on July 14th was one of those moments. Because when the shift happened, it was not quiet in the unseen. It was thunderous. From where Michael stood, there was no confusion about what was taking place. He did not see fragments. He did not see isolated events. He saw the full picture, the entire structure of resistance that had surrounded you collapsing at once. You must understand this clearly. What fell was not small. It was not just a single burden lifting. It was not just one obstacle being removed. It was a system of forces that had been layered around your life. Some recent, some older, some tied to patterns you thought you had already escaped, and others connected to things you did not even realize were still influencing you. These forces were not operating randomly. They were structured, coordinated, and deeply rooted in keeping you exactly where you were. And for a long time they held their position. That is why the pressure felt consistent. That is why the heaviness felt familiar. That is why certain cycles kept repeating, even when you tried to move forward. Because what surrounded you was not temporary resistance. It was a formation. But on July 14th, that formation broke. And when it broke, it did not break in pieces. It collapsed completely. Archangel Michael saw it clearly. He saw what had been standing for so long suddenly lose its stability. He saw forces that once held ground begin to fall back, not slowly, but instantly, as if something greater had stripped them of their ability to remain. He saw what could only be described as a chain reaction, where the fall of one force triggered the fall of another, and another, and another, until the entire structure gave way. This is why the message speaks of 1,000 dark forces falling at once. Because from the perspective of the unseen, it was not just one thing ending. It was many. Layers upon layers of resistance, collapsing in a single moment of divine authority. And the sound of that collapse was not silence. It was release. It was the sound of pressure breaking. It was the sound of something that had been holding on far too long finally losing its grip. You may not have heard it with your ears, but your spirit felt the result of it. Because when something that large collapses, the space it occupied cannot remain the same. It must clear. It must open. It must shift. And that is exactly what happened around you. Michael did not just witness the fall, he oversaw it. His presence was not passive observation. It was enforcement. He stood as the boundary between what was falling and what could no longer return. He ensured that what collapsed in that moment did not simply scatter and attempt to regroup. He ensured that what lost its position lost its access. This is where everything changes for you. Because what fell was not just removed temporarily. It was stripped of its authority to remain in your life the way it once did. That is why certain things will begin to feel different moving forward. That is why patterns that once felt unbreakable will no longer hold the same power. That is why situations that once drained you will begin to lose their influence over you. Because the forces behind them have already fallen. But here is what makes this even more powerful. You did not have to see it for it to be real. You did not have to understand it in that moment for it to take effect. The shift happened whether you recognized it or not. And now you are living in the aftermath of something your physical eyes never witnessed, but your spirit is now beginning to understand. This is why there is a quiet strength rising within you. This is why there is a growing sense that something has changed, even if you cannot fully explain it. This is why you are beginning to feel less controlled by what once weighed on you. Because what held that weight in place is no longer standing. And Archangel Michael saw every part of it. He saw what tried to remain. He saw what resisted until the very end. And he saw what ultimately fell when divine authority was released. This was not a small victory. This was not a minor adjustment. This was a complete disruption of everything that had been working against you. And now, the space that has been cleared is no longer occupied by what once held you back. It is open. It is protected. And it is being prepared for what comes next. Type IT has fallen in the comments if you receive this truth. Blessing code 4040 is now activated around your path. Before you can fully understand the magnitude of what shifted on July 14th, you must first understand why there was so much resistance around you in the first place. Because nothing that happened to you was accidental. Nothing you felt was random. And the pressure you experienced before that moment was not meaningless. You were targeted. Not because you are weak, but because you are carrying something that could not be ignored. This is the part many people misunderstand. When life becomes heavy, when things start to feel blocked, when progress seems delayed, the natural reaction is to assume something is wrong with you. You question your decisions. You question your worth. You wonder if you are somehow responsible for the resistance you are facing. But what if the resistance was not a sign of your failure but a reaction to your potential? Because everything that surrounded you before July 14th was not just reacting to who you were in that moment. It was reacting to who you were becoming. There is something about you that was never meant to stay where you were. Something about your path that was not designed to repeat the same cycles. Something about your spirit that refused to remain confined to the same patterns, the same limitations, the same level of existence. And anything that refuses to stay the same will face resistance. That is why things intensified before the breakthrough. That is why the pressure increased instead of easing. That is why it felt like the closer you got to clarity, the more confusion tried to surround you. Because the forces that had grown comfortable in your life recognized the shift before you fully understood it yourself. They recognized that you were no longer operating at the same level. They recognized that your awareness was changing. They recognized that your connection to what is true, what is real, what is aligned was becoming stronger. And once that begins to happen, anything that depends on your old version cannot remain undisturbed. So it reacts, not randomly, strategically, This is why you may have noticed certain patterns repeating more intensely than before. Situations that should have been resolved suddenly resurfacing. Emotions you thought you had processed suddenly becoming overwhelming again. People behaving in ways that felt unfamiliar, almost as if something had shifted in their energy toward you. That was not coincidence. That was exposure. Because when you begin to move toward something greater, everything that cannot go with you begins to reveal itself. Not always clearly, not always in ways that are easy to understand, but in ways that create friction. Enough friction to either pull you back or push you forward. And in your case, it pushed you forward. Even when it didn't feel like it. Even when you doubted it. Even when it seemed like nothing was changing. Because what was happening was not meant to be comfortable. It was meant to reach a breaking point. And that breaking point was July 14th. But here is what makes your situation different. You were not just dealing with surface-level resistance. You were dealing with layers. Layers of influence, layers of pressure, layers of patterns that had been building over time. Some of them recent, some of them older, some of them so deeply embedded that they had become part of your normal experience without you even realizing it. And when something that deeply rooted begins to shift, it does not leave quietly. It resists. That is why the buildup felt so intense. Because what was being challenged was not just a moment. It was a strategy. A system that had to be dismantled before you could move into what was next for you. And this is why Archangel Michael had to step in. Because what was surrounding you required more than gradual change. It required intervention. It required authority. It required a moment where everything that had been holding on would be forced to release at once. That is why the breakthrough did not come slowly. That is why it did not feel like a process. Because the resistance you were facing was never meant to fade over time. It was meant to collapse. All at once. And that is exactly what happened. But now, you must see your past pressure differently. It was not there to stop you. It was there to reveal what needed to be removed. It was there to expose what could not go with you into your next phase. It was there to bring everything to the surface so that when the moment came, nothing would remain hidden. And when that moment arrived, everything that had been revealed fell. That is why you were targeted. Not because you were vulnerable, but because you were advancing. Not because you were weak, but because you were rising. And now, everything that tried to hold you in place has lost its position. Type I was chosen for this in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 5050 is now activated over your journey. There is something you need to realize now, something that may completely change the way you look at everything that has happened since July 14th. Because the shift was not only real, it left evidence. Quiet evidence. Subtle signs. Moments so small that you may have overlooked them, dismissed them, or explained them away as coincidence. But they were not coincidence. They were confirmation. Because when something that powerful shifts in the spiritual realm, it always leaves traces in your natural experience. Not always loud, not always dramatic, but noticeable in a way that your spirit recognizes before your mind catches up. And if you look back now, even just for a moment, you will begin to see it. There was a change. Maybe it showed up as a sudden sense of calm that didn't match your situation. A moment where your thoughts slowed down, where the usual pressure you carried simply wasn't there. It may not have lasted long, but it was different enough to stand out. You may have even questioned it, wondering why you felt that way when nothing around you had visibly changed. That was one of the signs. Or maybe it showed up as distance. A sudden emotional detachment from something that once felt heavy. A situation that used to trigger you no longer having the same hold over you. Conversations that once drained you suddenly feeling easier to step away from. You didn't force the distance. It just happened. It was another sign. You may have noticed changes in people as well. Subtle shifts in behavior. Delayed responses. Unexpected silence. Or even the opposite. Sudden attempts to reconnect, to engage, to re-enter your space without clear reason. It may have felt confusing at the time, like something was slightly off but not enough to fully understand. That was not random. Because when the atmosphere around you shifts, it affects everything connected to it. People feel it, even if they don't understand it. Situations respond to it, even if they don't change immediately. Energy adjusts to it, even if it takes time to fully settle. And you were standing right in the center of that adjustment. But the most important sign of all was internal. Something inside you changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. There was a moment where you felt different even if you couldn't explain how. A subtle awareness, a slight clarity, a sense that something had ended, even if you didn't know exactly what. It may have been brief, almost easy to ignore, but it was there. That was your spirit recognizing the shift. Because your spirit does not need physical proof to understand what has already happened. It feels it. It knows it. It responds to it instantly. And that is why, even now, there is a part of you that feels like you are no longer in the same place you were before. Even if your environment looks similar. Even if your circumstances appear unchanged. Even if your routine feels the same. You are not the same. Something hath been lifted. Something has been cleared. Something that once occupied space in your life is no longer there. And the signs you experienced were your first glimpse of that reality. But here is what makes this even more powerful. At the time, you may not have fully understood those signs. You may have overlooked them. You may have doubted them. You may have tried to explain them away with logic. But now you are beginning to see them differently. Because now you have context. Now you understand that those moments were not random experiences. They were evidence of a shift that had already taken place. This is why reflection is so important right now. Not to dwell on the past, but to recognize the truth of what has already happened. Because once you see the signs clearly, you can no longer question whether the shift was real. You begin to understand that it was not something you imagine. It was not something temporary. You were not something uncertain. It was a definitive moment where everything changed and left behind proof in the form of subtle, undeniable signs. And now, as you move forward, those signs will become clearer, stronger, more noticeable. Because once a shift like that happens, it does not reverse. It unfolds. And what you missed before, you are now beginning to recognize. Type I see the signs now in the comments if this resonates with you. Blessing code 6060 is now activated within your awareness. Now listen carefully, because this is where many people misunderstand what happens after a shift like the one you experienced on July 14th. They believe that once something falls, it disappears completely, never to be seen again. But that is not how it works. What falls often tries to return. But what you must understand is this. Returning is not the same as re-entering. Because after the collapse that Archangel Michael witnessed, something else was established in that same moment. A boundary, a line, a separation between what once had access to you and what no longer does. And this is where everything changes. Because in the moments after the fall, there was an attempt, a subtle, almost desperate attempt, for those same forces to regain their position. Not with strength, because their strength had already been broken, but with familiarity. with patterns you had known before, with thoughts that sounded like your own, with situations that felt similar to what you had already experienced. You may have noticed it. A brief return of old emotions, a familiar thought pattern trying to resurface, a situation that looked like something you had already gone through. It may have felt confusing, almost as if nothing had changed at all. But that is where discernment becomes critical, because what you were experiencing was not the same force returning with authority. It was an echo, a residual attempt to reconnect to something that was no longer available to it. This is why it felt weaker. This is why it felt inconsistent. This is why it could not fully take hold the way it once did. Because what had been removed could not simply step back into the same space. And Archangel Michael ensured that. Because when the collapse happened, it was not just about removing what was there. It was about preventing its return. He did not just witness the fall, he secured the boundary. He established a separation so clear in the spiritual realm that anything that once had access to you could no longer cross that line in the same way again. This is why certain things may try to appear familiar but they cannot fully reconnect. This is why old patterns may attempt to resurface but they cannot sustain themselves. This is why situations may look similar on the surface but they do not carry the same weight, the same control, the same influence they once did. Because the access point has been closed. And once access is removed, influence cannot remain. But here is where you play a role now. Because while those forces cannot cross the boundary on their own, they can still attempt to draw you back toward it. Not by force, but by familiarity. By making something feel normal again. By presenting something in a way that feels comfortable, recognizable, easy to step back into without thinking. That is the only way they can try to reconnect. But even that is limited. Because now, you are not the same. You have shifted. Your awareness has changed. Your sensitivity to what is real and what is not has increased. This is why those attempts will not feel right to you. They will feel off, incomplete, out of place. And that feeling is your protection. Because it is showing you that what once had influence no longer belongs in your space. This is the difference between before and after July 14th. Before, those forces could operate without resistance. Now, they cannot even fully establish themselves. Before, they could remain hidden within your normal experience. Now, they are exposed the moment they attempt to appear, and that exposure alone weakens them further. Because what cannot remain hidden cannot maintain control. This is why you must trust what you feel moving forward. If something feels off, it is because it does not belong. If something feels forced, it is because it is trying to reconnect in a space that has already been cleared. If something feels familiar but not aligned, it is because it is an echo, not a presence. And echoes fade. They do not rebuild. They do not regain strength. They do not reestablish authority. They disappear. And that is exactly what will continue to happen. Because what fell on July 14th did not just fall temporarily. It lost its ability to return the way it once did. And the boundary that now surrounds you is not fragile. It is enforced. It is maintained. It is guarded. And it ensures that what once stood against you cannot stand there again. Type IT cannot return in the comments if you receive this truth. Blessing code 7070 is now activated around your protection. What you need to understand in this moment is that the shift on July 14th was not only about what fell, it was also about what was established in its place. Because when something is removed at that level, it does not leave emptiness. It creates space, and that space is never left unguarded. It is filled, secured, protected. And right now there is a new level of protection surrounding you that was not there before. This is not something symbolic. This is not something abstract. This is something active, something intentional, something that was placed around you the moment those forces collapsed, ensuring that what once had access cannot simply return, cannot rebuild, cannot reposition itself the way it once did. This is where Archangel Michael's role becomes even more important, because he did not step away after the fall. He remained. His presence did not withdraw once the battle ended. It intensified. Because what comes after a breakthrough requires protection just as much as the breakthrough itself. And what surrounds you now is not passive. It is aware. It is responsive. It is precise. There is a covering over your life that is actively filtering what is allowed to reach you and what is not. Things that once would have affected you deeply are now being intercepted before they can fully land. Situations that once would have drained your energy are now being redirected or weakened before they even reach your awareness. That is why certain things may feel different, even if you cannot immediately explain why. Because the interaction between you and your environment has changed. Not everything can reach you the same way anymore. Not everything can influence you the same way anymore. Not everything can attach itself to your space the way it once did. And this is happening whether you consciously recognize it or not. You may notice it in small ways. Delays that actually protect you. Disruptions that prevent you from stepping into something that would have pulled you backward. Unexpected distance from people or situations that once had strong access to your energy. At first, these moments may feel inconvenient or confusing, but they are not random. They are protective adjustments. Because what surrounds you now is not just reacting to what happens, it is preventing what should not happen. This is the difference. Before July 14th, you were navigating through resistance. Now, that resistance is being filtered before it reaches you. Before, you had to process everything that came your way. And now, not everything is allowed to come your way in the first place. And this is why your experience moving forward will begin to feel different, even if your external reality has not fully caught up yet. Because protection works quietly. It does not always announce itself. It does not always make its presence obvious. But its effects are undeniable. You will begin to notice that certain situations resolve themselves without your involvement. Certain conflicts never fully develop. Certain connections fade without confrontation. Certain opportunities appear at the right time without force. This is not coincidence. This is alignment under protection. But there is something you must understand clearly. This protection does not remove your awareness. It sharpens it. Because while the barrier around you is strong, you are still being guided to recognize what belongs and what does not. This is why your sensitivity is increasing. This is why you are becoming more aware of energy, of intention, of what feels right and what feels off. Because protection and awareness work together, the barrier prevents what should not enter. Your awareness ensures that you do not step back toward what has already been removed. And this is where your responsibility begins. Not to fight, not to struggle, but to remain aligned. To trust what you feel. To trust when something does not sit right. To trust when something feels out of place. Because those signals are not random. They are part of the protection working through you. You are not being left to figure this out alone. You are being guided, shielded, and positioned all at once. And Archangel Michael remains present in this process. Not as a distant observer, but as an active force maintaining what has been established around you. Ensuring that what fell stays fallen. Ensuring that what has been removed stays removed. ensuring that what surrounds you now continues to protect what is ahead of you. This is not temporary. This is not fragile. This is structured, is intentional, and it is now part of your reality. Type "I am covered" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 8080 is now activated around your protection. As you stand under this divine covering, understand this truth. What protects you is the same light that is meant to reach others still standing unguarded in their darkness. Scripture declares, "Those who sow in tears shall reap in joy." And right now, your obedience has the power to become someone else's breakthrough. I feel this deeply. This is not a casual moment. This is a prophetic invitation. When you release your support through Super Thanks, with a PayPal link in the description or QR code on your screen, you are not giving away. You are planting into a living harvest of souls waiting to be awakened. Every seed becomes oil in the lamp of another life. Every act of giving becomes fire that pushes back darkness where someone else feels alone. Do not delay this moment, because what you do now echoes beyond what you can see. As you give, heaven responds, multiplies, and marks your obedience. Step forward now and release what hath been placed on your heart. Now listen closer, because everything you have heard so far, the fall, the shift, the protection, was not only happening around you, it was also happening within you. Because a moment like July 14th does not just change your environment, it activates something inside your spirit that cannot be undone. Something awakened in you that day, not loudly, not dramatically, but powerfully. Because when those forces fell, they did not just lose their position around you. They lost their influence within you. And in the space where that influence once existed, something new began to rise. Authority. Not the kind of authority that is forced or announced, but the kind that is felt. The kind that shifts the way you think, the way you respond, the way you move through your life without needing to explain it to anyone. You may not have recognized it immediately, but if you look at yourself now, you will see it. There is a difference in you. You are not reacting the same way you used to. The things that once unsettled you no longer carry the same weight. Situations that once confused you now feel clearer, even if you don't have all the answers yet. That is not coincidence. That is activation. Because when the pressure around you broke, it released something within you that had been waiting to emerge. A level of clarity that was always there but blocked. A level of confidence that was always present but suppressed. A level of awareness that was always available but clouded. And now it is rising. This is your new authority. It does not need validation. It does not need permission. It does not need to be explained. It simply exists, and it expresses itself through you. You may notice it in the way you see things now. You are recognizing patterns faster. You are sensing intentions more clearly. You are no longer easily pulled into confusion or distraction. Even when something tries to present itself the same way it did before, you can feel the difference. That is not something you learned. That is something that was activated. Because your spirit now operates at a different level of awareness. And this changes everything. Because authority is not about control over others. It is about alignment within yourself. It is about standing in a position where what does not belong cannot influence you the same way anymore. It is about moving forward without being pulled backward by what once held you in place. This is why your decisions may start to feel different. You may find yourself choosing differently without overthinking it. You may walk away from things that once felt difficult to leave. You may say no where you once would have said yes. You may remain silent where you once would have reacted. That is not hesitation. That is authority. Because you are no longer operating from the same place you were before. You are no longer reacting from pressure. You are responding from clarity. And clarity is one of the strongest forms of authority you can have. But here is what you must understand moving forward. This authority must be honored, not ignored, not questioned, not overridden by old habits or familiar patterns. Because the only way anything from your past could attempt to reconnect is if you step out of alignment with what has already been activated inside you. And this is why awareness is so important now. Because you will be able to feel when something does not match your new level. You will be able to recognize when something is trying to pull you back into a space you have already moved beyond. And in those moments your authority will guide you. Not with confusion, not with doubt, but with certainty. A quiet, steady certainty that tells you what belongs and what does not. That is the shift within you. That is what July 14th activated. And this is why you are no longer the same. Because even if everything around you is still adjusting, you have already changed. And once that change happens internally, nothing external can fully return you to where you were before. You have crossed a line of awareness, a line of clarity, a line of authority. And there is no going back from that. Type "I walk in authority" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 9090 is now activated within your spirit. Now this is where the message becomes serious, because what has happened for you is powerful, but it also comes with responsibility. Not the kind of responsibility that feels heavy or overwhelming, but the kind that requires awareness. Because after a shift like the one that took place on July 14th, there is one thing that matters more than anything else: what you choose next. You must understand this clearly. The fall already happened. The protection has already been established. The authority has already been activated within you. But what you do from this point forward will determine how fully you step into what has been prepared for you. And this is where many people lose alignment, not because something external overpowers them, but because they return to what has already been removed. That is what you must not do. You must not go back. Not physically, not emotionally, not mentally, not spiritually. Because even though those forces cannot cross the boundary that has been set around you, you can still choose to step back toward what no longer belongs in your space. And that is the only opening that remains. This is why the warning is being given now. Because after a shift like this, there is often a moment of testing. Not a test designed to make you fail, but a moment where you are given the opportunity to recognize your own alignment. A moment where familiar patterns may appear again, not with the same strength, but with enough familiarity to see if you will respond the same way you used to. And if you are not aware, it can feel almost natural to slip back into old responses, old conversations, old attachments, old ways of thinking. But what once felt natural is no longer aligned. And that is the difference you must hold on to. Because the moment you step back into those patterns even slightly, you begin to move away from the clarity that has been activated within you. You begin to lower your awareness. You begin to reconnect with something that has already been disconnected from you. And this is not about punishment. This is about alignment. Because what had been prepared for you now requires a different version of you. A version that does not tolerate what once drained you. A version that does not entertain what once confused you. A version that does not remain in spaces that no longer reflect who you are becoming. This is why you may feel a strong sense of resistance when something familiar tries to re-enter your life. That resistance is not discomfort. It is guidance. It is showing you that what once felt normal is no longer meant for you. And this is where your authority must be used. Not to fight, not to argue, but to choose. To choose not to engage with what pulls you backward. To choose not to revisit what has already been clear. to choose not to lower yourself to a level you have already moved beyond. Because every choice you make now either reinforces the shift or weakens your connection to it. And this is why awareness matters more than ever. Because the return will not always look obvious. It will not always appear as something clearly negative. Sometimes it will look familiar, comfortable, even harmless. But you will feel the difference. And that feeling is what you must trust. Because your spirit now recognizes what your mind may still be processing. It knows what belongs. It knows what does not. And it will guide you if you listen. This is not about fear. This is about clarity. You are not being warned because something is about to overpower you. You are being guided so that you do not step back into what has already lost its power over you. Because the truth is you are no longer in the same position you were before. You are not as vulnerable as you once felt. You are not as easily influenced as you once were. You are not standing in the same environment you were navigating before July 14th. You have moved. You have shifted. You have been elevated. And now you must remain there. Because what is ahead of you cannot be reached by returning to what is behind you. And the moment you fully understand that is the moment everything begins to align effortlessly in your favor. Type "I will not go back" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 1010 is now activated over your choices. What comes next is not something distant. It is not something months away or even weeks away. It is immediate. It is unfolding now. Because after a shift like the one that took place on July 14th, there is always a window, a very specific window, where everything begins to realign around what has already happened. And for you, that window is the next 72 hours. This is not about fear. This is not about pressure. This is about precision. Because what has already shifted in the spiritual realm is now beginning to settle into your physical reality. And the next 3 days will determine how smoothly that alignment takes place. You may already feel it. A sense that something is moving. A subtle awareness that things are not exactly the same. A feeling that decisions you make right now carry more weight than usual. That is not your imagination. That is alignment in motion. Because when something as significant as what happened to you takes place, there is a period where everything begins to adjust around it. Paths begin to open. Certain things begin to fall away. New directions begin to present themselves, sometimes quietly, sometimes unexpectedly. And in this window your awareness becomes critical. Not because something is trying to harm you, but because something is trying to position you. This is the difference you must understand. Before July 14th, you were navigating resistance. Now, you are stepping into alignment. And alignment requires recognition. Because what appears in these next 72 hours will not always look dramatic. It may show up as a simple choice, a conversation, a decision that feels small on the surface but carries deeper significance, an opportunity that seems ordinary but feels different in your spirit, a moment where you are prompted to act or not act. These are not random moments. These are points of alignment, and how you respond to them will determine how fully you step into what has already been activated for you. This is why stillness becomes important now. Not inactivity but awareness. Because when you slow down enough to observe what is happening, you begin to notice the patterns. You begin to see what is being placed in front of you and what is being removed from your path. You begin to recognize that certain things are no longer aligning the way they once did, and that recognition is your guidance. Because in this window, you are not meant to force anything. You are not meant to chase anything. You are not meant to hold on to anything that is clearly moving out of alignment. You are meant to observe and respond with clarity. This is where your authority and your protection come together, because the same awareness that was activated within you will guide you through this period. You will feel when something is right. You will feel when something is not. And that feeling is what you must trust, because overthinking will only create confusion. And confusion is no longer where you operate. You now move from clarity. And clarity does not need to be loud. It is steady. It is quiet. It is certain. This is also a time where you may notice certain things accelerating. Situations that have been stagnant may suddenly shift. Decisions that felt unclear may suddenly become obvious. People may reveal themselves more clearly, either aligning with you or distancing themselves without explanation. Do not resist these changes. Do not question them unnecessarily, because what is aligning now is doing so in response to what has already shifted. And anything that does not align is simply moving out of the way. This is the natural progression after a breakthrough. But here is what you must remember above all else. You do not need to control this process. You do not need to force outcomes. You do not need to make everything happen at once. Your role is to remain aligned, to stay aware, to trust what you feel, to move when it feels right and to pause when it does not. Because the next 72 hours are not about effort. They are about positioning. And if you remain aligned during this window, everything that follows will unfold with a level of ease that you have not experienced before. Because the hardest part has already passed. The shift has already happened. And now everything else is simply catching up to it. Type "I trust the process" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 1111 is now activated over your next 72 hours. Now we arrive at the final truth, the one that ties everything together, the one that you must carry with you from this moment forward. Because what happened on July 14th was not just a shift, not just a breakthrough, not just a moment of release. It was a declaration, a line drawn in the unseen, a decision made in your favor, a moment where everything that once stood against you lost its authority to remain. And now, you must understand what that means for you. You are no longer accessible in the way you once were, not to confusion, not to repeated cycles, not to the same patterns that once drained your energy and clouded your direction. Because what surrounded you before no longer defines the space you stand in now. You have moved beyond it. This is not something you need to force yourself to believe. This is something that has already been established. Because when Archangel Michael witnessed the fall of those forces, he did not just observe a moment of victory. He confirmed a permanent shift in your positioning. What once had influence over your life has now been removed from its place of authority. And once authority is removed, it cannot simply be reclaimed. This is why you must begin to see yourself differently now. Not as someone who is still fighting the same battles. Not as someone who is still trying to break free from the same struggles. But as someone who has already crossed out of that space and is now standing in a new one. A space where what once attacked you can no longer reach you in the same way. A space where your clarity is stronger than confusion. Where your awareness is stronger than illusion. Where your direction is no longer controlled by what used to hold you back. This is what it means to be untouchable. Not untouchable in a way that isolates you, but untouchable in a way that protects your alignment. In a way that ensures that what once disrupted you no longer has access to disrupt you again. And this is why everything moving forward will begin to feel different. Not because your life suddenly becomes perfect, but because you are no longer standing in the same vulnerability you once were. You are standing in a position of alignment, of protection, of authority, and that changes how everything interacts with you. You will begin to notice that what once overwhelmed you no longer carries the same weight. What once confused you no longer has the same power to pull you in. What once delayed you no longer has the same ability to block your path, because you are no longer operating under the same conditions. You are operating from a new foundation, and that foundation was established the moment everything shifted on July 14th. But here is what you must carry with you beyond this moment. This is not the end of your story. This is the beginning of a new phase. A phase where what has been cleared now creates space for what belongs to you to enter. A phase where alignment replaces resistance, where clarity replaces confusion, where movement replaces stagnation. And this will not happen all at once. It will unfold, step by step, moment by moment. But it will unfold, because what needed to fall has already fallen, and what needed to shift has already shifted, and now you are standing in the result of that. So do not question where you are. Do not doubt what you feel. Do not second-guess the changes happening within you, because they are real. They are valid. They are the direct result of a moment you may not have fully seen but are now fully living in. You are not the same. You are not where you were. And you are not going back, because what once stood against you has already lost its place, and you have already stepped into what comes next. Type "I am untouchable" in the comments if you receive this message. Blessing code 1212 is now activated over your life. As this truth settles into your spirit, understand this: your transformation is not just for you. It is a light meant to reach those still standing in darkness, waiting for their moment to awaken. The word declares, "Give, and it shall be given unto you. Pressed down, shaken together, and running over." And this is not just scripture. It is a living promise calling you into action right now. I feel this strongly. This is your moment to respond as a vessel, to release what God has placed in your hands so that others may receive what He has placed in your heart. When you give through Super Thanks with the PayPal link in the description or QR code on your screen, you are not supporting a message. You are multiplying a movement, igniting truth in lives you may never see but heaven fully counts. Every seed you release becomes a spark of revelation in someone else's life, a breakthrough waiting to happen, a soul pulled back into alignment. Do not hesitate in this moment, because obedience now carries divine acceleration. Step forward, release your seed, and watch how heaven responds to your faith in motion.